On a busy street corner where cars honked and people rushed by, a homeless woman sat on the cold sidewalk. She was holding a sign that read, "Anything helps for my child." Beside her, a little girl, no older than 4 or 5, sat on the ground, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. Her eyes were tired, and her clothes were worn from days of travel. The woman's name was Sarah, and her daughter's name was Emma. For weeks they had been living on the streets. Sarah had never imagined her life would come to this. Once she had a steady job, a small apartment, and a hope for the future. But after losing her job, things started to slip away. Soon, she couldn't afford rent, and she found herself without a home. Now on this crowded street corner, Sarah did everything she could to get by. She had learned that people didn't always notice the signs of struggle in others. Some people gave her quick glances, avoiding eye contact, while others hurried past as if she didn't exist. It wasn't easy, but she didn't have a choice. She had to take care of Emma. As the afternoon sun began to set, Sarah knew they needed food, but it felt like a distant hope. Most people didn't stop to offer help. It wasn't until Sarah started singing that things began to change. Her voice was soft at first, barely rising above the noise of the traffic. She sang an old song her grandmother had taught her, one that spoke of love and longing. Her voice, though tired, carried the weight of her emotions. Every word was filled with a feeling of desperation, but also a deep, quiet strength. Sarah wasn't singing just for herself. She was singing for her daughter, Emma. She wanted to feed her. She wanted to give her something better than this life on the streets. As she sang, a few people stopped, their faces turning toward her. A few dropped coins into the cup in front of her, and Sarah gave them a small, grateful smile. But it wasn't enough. She needed more. She couldn't let her little girl go hungry again. She had to keep going. As the song came to an end, Sarah took a deep breath. Her throat felt raw, but she didn't stop. She started another song, a little louder this time. She sang with everything she had, hoping someone would hear her, hoping someone would help. Little Emma rested her head on Sarah's lap, her eyes closing as she drifted to sleep. For a moment, Sarah felt a pang of guilt. She knew Emma deserved better than this, better than the cold streets, the sleepless nights, and the endless searching for food. But what could she do? She had no choice but to keep trying. The sound of Sarah's voice filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone would stop. Someone who would listen. As Sarah continued singing, her voice grew louder, more confident. She wasn't just singing for coins anymore. She was singing for Emma. She was singing because she wanted to believe that things could get better. The song she sang had a special meaning. It reminded her of her mother's words, a memory she held onto tightly in the darkest of times. With each verse, the noise of the city seemed to fade away. The blaring horns and footsteps of passing strangers grew distant, as though the world was momentarily pausing to listen. Sarah sang with a passion she hadn't felt in a long time. She sang like her heart was in every note, hoping that someone, anyone, would stop and hear her. As the song echoed down the street, a few people slowed their pace. A man in a suit with a briefcase looked over at Sarah and then quickly turned away, as if trying not to get involved. A woman with shopping bags passed by, briefly glancing at the little girl resting on the sidewalk before walking on. But Sarah didn't mind. She had learned not to expect much. She had sung for hours without much luck, but this time there was something different in the air. Sarah's heart beat faster as she felt the tiniest shift, as though the world was about to change for them. She didn't know why she felt that way, but she couldn't ignore the feeling. Something told her that this song might be the one that reached someone. Across the street, a luxury car slowed down and then came to a stop. The car wasn't like the others that passed by in a rush. It was shiny, sleek, and expensive looking. The woman in the car, dressed in a formal suit, looked out the window, listening. Sarah couldn't see her face clearly, but she noticed how the woman seemed intrigued, almost moved by the sound of Sarah's singing. The car's engine turned off, and for a moment, everything was still. Sarah paused for a second, unsure of what was happening. Was someone stopping? Could it be that someone was actually listening? It wasn't often that anyone took a moment to notice. As Sarah continued singing, the car door opened slowly. The woman stepped out, her heels clicking softly on the pavement as she approached Sarah and Emma. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The woman looked different from anyone Sarah had met before. She was dressed well, her face calm and serious, but there was a kindness in her eyes that immediately made Sarah feel less alone. The woman stood there for a few moments, just watching, as if unsure of what to do next. Sarah's voice faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. She had to keep singing. She had to keep trying. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment she had been waiting for. The woman finally stepped closer, and Sarah felt a flutter of hope. Was this the help she had been longing for? Was someone finally going to help her and Emma? The woman in the luxury car stood silently for a moment, watching Sarah sing. Sarah could feel the woman's eyes on her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't afford to stop. Emma was still sleeping peacefully in her lap, and she knew that every song was a chance to make things a little better for her child. The woman took a small step closer, her shoes tapping quietly against the pavement. Sarah's heart raced. She didn't know what the woman was thinking, but something about her felt different. Sarah had seen people glance at her before, some with pity, some with annoyance. But this was different. This woman wasn't looking away. She was looking at Sarah with a kind, curious expression. When Sarah finished the song, she took a deep breath, wiping a tear that had fallen without her realizing. She looked up to see the woman standing in front of her now. The woman's face softened, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder what had brought her here, of all places. "Your voice is beautiful," the woman said quietly, her tone gentle but full of sincerity. Sarah blinked in surprise. No one had ever said something like that to her in so long. It felt like the world had stopped moving for a second, and all Sarah could focus on was the woman's words. "Thank you," Sarah replied softly. She wasn't used to compliments. She had spent too many days on the streets to believe that anyone could really care. But the woman's kindness made Sarah feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The woman looked down at the little girl, Emma, still asleep in her arms, and then back at Sarah. "How long have you been here?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, but she didn't want to lie. "A few weeks now," she said. "I lost my job. And after that, it just kind of all fell apart." Her voice cracked slightly, but she forced herself to keep calm. She didn't want to sound weak, especially not to this stranger. The woman nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That must be so hard. I can't imagine what you've been going through." Sarah didn't know what to say. She had never been good at asking for help, and now, even though this woman seemed kind, she still felt unsure. But as she looked into the woman's eyes, something told her that this might be the turning point she had been waiting for. "I don't mean to intrude, but if you need help, I can offer it," the woman said, her voice hesitant but genuine. "There's a shelter I know of, a safe place where you and your daughter can stay." For a moment, Sarah didn't speak. She just stared at the woman, not sure if she had heard correctly. Help? A safe place. The thought was almost too good to be true. Was this the kind of help she had always hoped for, but never dared to dream would come? The woman smiled softly when she saw Sarah's hesitation. "You don't have to say yes right now," she said, "but if you're open to it, I can take you there." Sarah swallowed hard, her heart racing. For the first time in weeks, she felt something shift inside her. Hope, maybe even trust. Was this really happening? "Yes," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, I think we'd like that." The woman smiled gently when Sarah agreed to accept the help. "Let's get you and your daughter out of here," she said, her voice soft but full of kindness. She turned toward the car and opened the passenger side door. waiting for Sarah to follow. For a moment, Sarah just stood there, still in disbelief. This was the moment she had been hoping for, but at the same time, she felt uncertain. What if it wasn't real? What if this was just another empty promise? She had heard promises before, people who had said they would help. But in the end, nothing changed. But the woman's calm presence reassured her. There was no rush, no pressure. Just a simple, honest offer. Sarah took a deep breath, carefully picking up Emma from her lap, and slowly stood up. She hesitated for just a second, glancing at her sign and the small cup of coins she had gathered. It wasn't much, but it was something. But Sarah knew that if she stayed, nothing would change. She had to trust this stranger for the sake of her daughter. Taking one last look at the street, Sarah walked toward the car. The woman helped her into the front seat, and Emma, still half asleep, was carefully placed in the back. Sarah buckled her seatbelt, feeling a strange mixture of fear and excitement. She didn't know where this ride would take her, but it had to be better than the streets. The car was quiet as they drove through the city. Sarah stared out the window, watching the familiar cityscape pass by. Buildings, streetlights, and faces that were just as lost as she felt. But for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of peace in the car. No one was rushing by. No one was ignoring them. The woman beside her seemed kind, and Sarah could feel the warmth of her presence. After a few minutes, the woman spoke. "My name is Clara," she said with a smile. "And you are?" Sarah turned to face her, surprised by how easily Clara had opened up. "I'm Sarah," she replied, her voice still soft. "And this is Emma." Clara nodded. "It's nice to meet you, Sarah. I'm happy to help. I know things haven't been easy, but this is just a start. There's a lot more ahead, and I believe you and Emma deserve better." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. No one had ever said something like that to her. Everyone had always treated her as if she were invisible, just another face in the crowd. But Clara was different. She saw her. She saw her struggle, and more importantly, she saw her strength. As the car continued to drive, Sarah allowed herself to imagine what life might be like if this was real. What if Emma could go to school one day? What if Sarah could find a job again? Maybe things weren't as hopeless as they seemed. Maybe Clara's kindness was the first step toward a better future. After a few more turns, the car finally stopped in front of a large building. It looked nothing like the shelters Sarah had seen before. This was clean, safe, and welcoming. There were no bars on the windows or harsh security guards. It was a place that felt like it could actually be a home. Clara turned to Sarah and smiled. "We're here. Welcome to your new beginning." As Sarah stepped out of the car, she couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. There was relief, but also a little fear. This place was nothing like the shelters she had seen before. It looked warm and inviting, but she couldn't shake the doubt that maybe it was too good to be true. Maybe it was all a mistake, but she couldn't let herself think that way. Emma needed her to stay strong. Clara opened the door to the building, and Sarah followed her inside. The moment they walked in, Sarah felt a wave of comfort. The air smelled clean, and the lighting was soft, not harsh like in many places. A friendly woman at the front desk greeted them with a warm smile. "Hi, Clara. It's good to see you again. Is this Sarah?" she asked, looking at Sarah with kind eyes. Clara nodded and introduced Sarah. "Yes, this is Sarah and her daughter, Emma. They're new here. Can you show them to a room?" The woman at the desk smiled and stood up. "Of course. Follow me, please." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she followed the woman down a hallway. She couldn't believe how calm and peaceful everything was. It felt nothing like the cold, empty streets. As they reached the door of a small room, the woman opened it for them. "This is your room," she said. "You can stay here as long as you need. If you need anything at all, just let us know." Sarah stepped inside, looking around at the simple but comfortable room. It had a small bed, a dresser, and even a little table by the window. There were soft blankets on the bed, and everything felt clean and new. It was the first time in weeks that Sarah felt like they were in a place that could truly be called a home. Emma, still half asleep, stretched out on the bed and yawned. Sarah smiled as she watched her daughter curl up, feeling safe and warm for the first time in what felt like forever. She gently brushed Emma's hair back and sat beside her, feeling a tear slip down her cheek. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for everything." Clara, who had been standing in the doorway, smiled softly. "You're welcome, Sarah. You and Emma deserve to feel safe and cared for." The woman at the front desk, who had introduced herself as Linda, returned shortly with a small bag of toiletries. "I thought you might need these," she said. "There's a shower down the hall, and you can have a hot meal later. We'll take care of everything." Sarah couldn't find the words to express her gratitude. She was overwhelmed by the kindness she was receiving. She had never experienced anything like this before. For so long, she had felt invisible, but now people were offering her help without asking for anything in return. As Linda left the room, Sarah sat on the bed next to Emma, her heart full of both gratitude and disbelief. How had they gone from the cold streets to this place of comfort and care in just a few hours? It felt like a dream, but Sarah knew that this wasn't a dream. It was real. And she was determined to make the most of this second chance. After settling into the room, Sarah sat quietly by the bed, watching Emma sleep soundly. The exhaustion from the past weeks seemed to finally lift from her shoulders. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt a small flicker of hope. Emma was safe, they had a roof over their heads, and there was food waiting for them. This was a new beginning, but Sarah couldn't help but wonder how long it would last. Clara, who had been so kind to Sarah, knocked on the door softly. Sarah looked up, startled from her thoughts. "Can I come in?" Clara asked, her voice gentle. "Of course," Sarah replied, smiling faintly. Clara stepped into the room, a kind expression on her face. She took a seat on the chair beside the bed. "I just wanted to check on you and see how you're doing," Clara said. "I know this is a big change, and I want to make sure you're comfortable." Sarah nodded, her heart full of gratitude. It's more than I could have hoped for. I can't believe how quickly things have changed. Just this morning, I was still on the street, unsure of what would happen next." Clara smiled warmly. "You deserve more than that, Sarah. I'm glad we could help, but I know this is just the beginning. You and Emma have a lot of potential, and I believe things can get better." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She wasn't used to hearing such encouraging words. She had grown so accustomed to feeling invisible and hopeless. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I don't know what to do next. I don't want to end up back on the streets." Clara leaned forward, her voice full of sincerity. "I understand, and I don't want that for you either. But I can offer you a chance to rebuild. There's a program here that helps people get back on their feet. We offer job training, housing assistance, and even counseling to help you regain your confidence. It's a lot of work, but you don't have to do it alone. You'll have support every step of the way." Sarah's heart raced. Job training, counseling. She hadn't even thought about things like that in months. The idea of finding a job, of standing on her own feet again, seemed impossible before, but now it felt like it might be within reach. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Sarah said quietly, looking down at her hands. "I've been so lost. I'm not sure I have the strength to start over." Clara placed a hand on her shoulder, a gentle but reassuring gesture. "You don't have to do it all at once. Just take it one step at a time. You've already taken the hardest step by being here, and that's something to be proud of. I believe in you, Sarah." The words hung in the air, heavy with hope. Sarah felt the warmth spread through her chest. She had never imagined that someone would believe in her, especially after everything she had been through. "I'll think about it," Sarah said, wiping away a tear that had escaped. Maybe I can try." Clara smiled. "That's all I'm asking. Just give it a chance. And remember, you're not alone. We're here for you." As Clara left the room, Sarah sat in silence, letting her words sink in. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a small spark of confidence. Maybe this was the chance she had been waiting for. Maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The next few days passed in a blur of new routines. Sarah felt a mix of nervousness and excitement as she began to settle into her new life. Clara had introduced her to some of the staff at the shelter, and everyone was kind and welcoming. They showed her where the kitchen was, where she could find help if she needed it, and where Emma could play with other children who stayed at the shelter. Sarah had never imagined she would be able to relax, but now, with Emma safe and playing happily, she allowed herself to breathe a little easier. The weight of the past few weeks had begun to lift, but there was still so much more to figure out. She had taken Clara's advice and signed up for the job training program, even though she wasn't sure where to begin. It was the first time in a long while that Sarah felt like she had a chance at something more. She still had doubts about her ability to learn new skills, doubts about her future, but each day she took small steps forward. She attended classes that taught basic computer skills, updated her resume, and learned about interview techniques. It felt overwhelming at times, but each time she got through a lesson, she felt a little more confident. Clara checked in on her every few days, making sure she was adjusting well and offering encouragement. "You're doing great, Sarah," she would say. "Every little step counts." One evening, after a long day of classes, Sarah sat in the common room with Emma, watching her daughter play with a new friend. She had just returned from the local library, where she had applied for a job at a nearby cafe. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Sarah smiled as she thought about how far she had come. Just a week ago, she had been wondering if she would ever have a chance again. Clara entered the room and sat next to Sarah, her eyes full of warmth. "How's it going today?" she asked. "It's been a good day," Sarah replied. "I applied for that job at the cafe. It's not a lot, but it's a step in the right direction. I'm still nervous, but I think I'm ready to try." Clara smiled. "I'm so proud of you. You've come a long way, Sarah. Remember, it's okay to take your time. You don't have to have everything figured out right now. You're doing amazing." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest at Clara's words. No one had ever been this supportive of her. It was more than just offering help. It was believing in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Sarah had spent so many nights feeling alone and lost, but now she was surrounded by people who cared. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah continued to take small steps forward. She kept attending her job training, and Emma made new friends. Sarah was amazed at how quickly her daughter adapted to their new life. Emma's laughter filled the shelter, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah could see a future for them both, one filled with hope, possibilities, and new beginnings. One afternoon, Sarah received a call. The cafe had called her back for an interview. Her heart raced, and for a moment, she was speechless. She had been hoping for this, but now that it was real, it felt almost too good to be true. "Emma," she whispered, her voice full of excitement. "We did it. We really did it." As she looked at her daughter, Sarah knew that this was only the beginning. There was still a long road ahead, but she finally felt ready to walk it. The day of Sarah's interview arrived, and she could hardly believe it. She had worked so hard, attending classes and practicing her interview skills, but now it was finally happening. Her heart raced as she looked at herself in the mirror, adjusting her clothes one last time. It wasn't much, a simple blouse and slacks, but it was the best she had. It was enough. Emma was at the shelter's daycare, playing with the other children. Sarah felt a pang in her chest as she thought about how much her daughter had changed in such a short time. Emma was happy, laughing, and enjoying her new life. Sarah was determined to do whatever it took to build a better future for them both. Clara, ever supportive, had helped Sarah prepare for the interview. She had given her tips on how to answer questions, how to be confident, and how to speak about her past without letting it define her. "You're not your past, Sarah," Clara had said. "You're stronger than you think. Just be yourself." and the right opportunity will come. Sarah took a deep breath and left the room. She walked to the bus stop, her hands shaking but her steps steady. She had come so far, and now it was time to take the final step. The cafe was just a short ride away, and as Sarah entered the building, she was greeted by a friendly woman behind the counter. "Hi, you must be Sarah. We're glad you could make it today. Let me show you to the manager." Sarah smiled nervously and followed the woman to the back of the cafe, where a man in his early 30s was waiting. He stood up as she entered, offering her a handshake. "Hi, Sarah. I'm John. Thanks for coming in today. How are you?" "I'm doing well, thank you," Sarah replied, shaking his hand. Her voice was calm, but inside, her mind was racing. This was her chance, her first real chance in months. They sat down, and John began asking her questions about her background and her experience. Sarah spoke about her time in the shelter, the job training she had completed, and her commitment to building a better life for herself and Emma. She spoke honestly about her struggles, but also about her determination to succeed. It wasn't easy, but she knew she had to show her potential. John listened carefully, nodding every so often. After what felt like an eternity, he smiled and put the papers down. "Sarah, I have to say, I'm impressed. We're looking for someone who is hardworking and dedicated, and you've shown that. I'd like to offer you the job. Would you like to start next week?" Sarah's heart soared. She couldn't believe it. After everything, she had finally been given a chance. "Yes, I would love to. Thank you so much." John smiled. "You're welcome, Sarah. I'm glad we could make this work." As Sarah left the cafe, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had done it. She had taken that first step back into the world. But this wasn't just about the job. This was about rebuilding her life, step by step, for herself and Emma. When she picked Emma up later that day, she couldn't wait to share the news. "Guess what, Emma? I got the job. We're going to be okay." Emma looked up at her, her face lighting up with a big smile. "Really, Mommy? That's amazing." Sarah hugged her tightly, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Weeks had passed since Sarah started her new job at the cafe. Every day felt like a small victory, and she could see the changes in both herself and Emma. Sarah was learning new skills, meeting new people, and beginning to rebuild the life she had lost. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Every step forward was a step away from the fear and uncertainty of the past. One evening after work, Sarah sat in the small living room of the shelter, her feet tired but her heart full. Emma was playing with her toys nearby, her laughter filling the room. Sarah smiled as she watched her daughter. Emma was thriving in the safe environment, surrounded by friends, and Sarah was doing everything she could to make sure Emma would have the future she deserved. That evening, as they prepared to go to bed, Clara visited Sarah's room. "How's everything going?" she asked, a friendly smile on her face. "It's going well," Sarah replied, her voice calm but happy. "I'm getting used to the routine, and Emma is so much happier here. I think we're really starting over." Clara nodded, her eyes warm with understanding. "I'm so proud of you, Sarah. You've come such a long way. And it's not just the job or the shelter. It's how much you've grown. You've found your strength again." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. Clara's words always seemed to reach her in ways she didn't expect. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. Sarah had rediscovered her hope and her confidence. She was no longer just surviving day by day. She was building something for her and Emma, a future that felt real. "I couldn't have done this without you," Sarah said quietly, looking down at her hands. "You've been so kind to me, to both of us." Clara smiled, shaking her head. "You did the hard work, Sarah. You're the one who made the change. I'm just glad I could help." The next day, Sarah came home after her shift to find a small envelope on her bed. It was from the manager at the cafe. With a little excitement and a bit of curiosity, Sarah opened it. Inside, she found a note that said, "You've been doing great work. We'd like to offer you a raise, starting next month. Keep it up, Sarah." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. She had worked so hard to get here, and now she was being recognized. This was a moment of triumph, a sign that she was truly on the right path. The raise wasn't just about money. It was about the recognition of her effort, her determination, and her growth. That evening, as Sarah and Emma sat together in their room, Sarah shared the news with her daughter. "Guess what, Emma? I got a raise at work. Things are really looking up for us." Emma clapped her hands excitedly. "Wow, Mommy, that's amazing." Sarah laughed and hugged Emma tightly. In that moment, she knew they were going to be okay. The journey hadn't been easy, but with every song Sarah had sung, every step she had taken, she had found something more valuable than anything else: hope. And with that hope, Sarah was building a future, not just for herself, but for her little girl as well. As they sat there, Emma leaning against Sarah, Sarah couldn't help but think of the days when she felt completely lost. But now, because of the kindness she had received and the strength she had found within herself, she was no longer lost. She had a direction, a purpose, and a life that was just beginning to unfold.